going to hand this over to him really quickly. I'll be sitting on my computer over here and asking people on the internet and such to send questions.
That's scary.
Yeah, exactly. But this is, I think this is open to you to kind of talk away at Kings and everything. So without further ado, Brandon Sanderson.
Is there water? Where? Okay, thanks. Oh. It's like a 3-person handoff. So, if you've never been to anything like this with me before, I'm very open. I will answer anything. Some of those answers may be raffos. If I raffle you, it's because it's out of respect for Robert Jordan and his material, and also out of respect for the NDA that I signed. So you can ask about my books, you can ask about my experience with Wheel of Time, you can ask about just pretty much anything. I will give the preface. Most of you already know this. I've been talking about this a lot lately. I will do my best to answer your Wheel of Time related questions. But remember that there are 3 million words worth of notes, and I did not have time to memorize them. Now you laugh about that, but the thing is, I mean, Jim spent 20 plus years building all of this and in creating this world and memorizing all of this. And I had the option to spend 3 years memorizing that and then write the books, or write the books and when I ran into a question I needed to know or something, then have Maria and Alan research it and get me the relevant files. Jim's files are very interesting. He'd like to make new folders for things. A lot of new folders. Like they give me a CD burned with all this stuff, and there's like folders inside of folders inside of folders inside of folders, and in that final folder there's like one file that has 2 paragraphs in it. And this was his some way that he just arranged, you know, the way his brain thought. He was a genius, and he had a lot of genius people have make their own notation system and their own organization system, and his is a lot like that. And so there are files all over the place, there are scenes all over the place, and fortunately I had Maria and Alan to collect most of this together. But I do spend a lot of time reading in these. But you know, when you ask the esoteric questions, you could ask those of Jim. And he could just rattle off an answer, or he could raffle you and smile knowingly. I can give you general impressions on some of these things, but I can't give you specifics because the way I actually work and think is I work from notes. This is how I work on my own books. I go and I keep everything on the computer and in files, and that's how I think. If I need to answer a question, I go look it up. I'm not the type that can rattle off my favorite movie quotes. I just have them all written down so I can find them when I need them. Does that make sense? And so just to preface that, I'm not going to not answer your questions, but a lot of if you ask me the really esoteric ones, I will say, this is my impression. I would have to check the notes, or if it's a one that I don't know enough about to even say that, I'll say MAFO, which is Ask Maria. Which is Maria and find out, which just essentially means we've got to go to the notes and figure it out. A lot of times when I'm writing a scene, what I'll do is I'll upload it, if that makes sense. Like I'll go and I'll read everything relevant I need to know. I'm like, all right, I need to know everything about Shan culture. I need to know a little about this. I need to know about a little bit about transmigration. All of these things, everything that's important for that scene. I need to know these 16 characters, who they are, how they talk, everything like that, how they think. I'll upload that all into my brain. I'll write the scene, and then I'll wipe it and replace it with something else. And so you can get fragments of that when you ask me questions, but I won't always be able to give you the specifics. So let's just go ahead, let you guys ask me questions, and I'll do my darndest to give you answers. And I do have raffle cards with me, so for those who know what those are. So go ahead, what are you guys curious about? Okay. I will repeat the questions.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so the question that I have, it might be a little esoteric, but how do the Randlanders know that they get reincarnated?
Okay, how do the Randlanders know they get reincarnated? That was on your little slip that you handed to me, Randlander.
To you, actually.
There's a phone right here. Should there be a phone right here? Is that an IED?
Would we do that to you? We need you to catch the series.
Someone, if you lost a phone, it's right there. How do the Randlanders know that they get reincarnated? I actually, of all those little slips they handed me, that was one of my favorite. Just because it is an interesting philosophical question. A couple things you have to keep in mind is they do have the heroes bound to the horn who do know a lot about this, which is where information could have come from. And we see a lot of, we see a lot of dealing with the future and the past, with the pattern in the Randland world. I think they probably knew a lot of this during the Age of Legends. A lot of things that right now they still know the answers, but they've forgotten the rationale, if that makes sense. They've forgotten all the sort of the reasons and the groundwork behind it, but they still remember because they knew a lot more about this back then. But there are still, there are lots of random Tarangriel around, such as the columns that show people glimpses of the past. There are other things like that in the world that can add substantiation to the sort of metaphysics. I think it's actually pretty. You give it a long enough swath of time in Randland, they're going to figure these things out because of actual factual events that happen. The heroes of the Horn being one example.
But wouldn't somebody need to be reincarnated, remember their...
They talk to the heroes.
Yeah, wouldn't someone, you can just have, if Brigitte says, yeah, everyone's reborn, I'm reborn this many times, everyone goes through that, suddenly you have a factual event to start a mythology for it. You have people you can talk to that can explain these sorts of things. Maybe there are people who were reborn that remember their past lives. I can't confirm or deny that specifically. To do that would be to confirm or deny whether Rand was going crazy or whether he was actually hearing Lucerne, which is not a lid. I'm not going to put the nail in that particular coffin. I'm not going to answer that one for you because Jim specifically left that unanswered through the books. And there are people on both sides that argue very strongly for either side. And that is, the thing about that is, people in world would argue about that too. That's not an answer, that's a question like, is there a God in our world? That you can find people who are going to argue on both sides. To answer that would be to answer the metaphysics of the Wheel of Time world in a way that I don't think is appropriate. So, you have what's written in the books. This is what they believe. This is what they say happens. We know, at least Brigitte remembers being reborn. Is it really happening? Well, all facts seem to say yes, but I bet there are some people in Randland who don't believe it happens and would argue against there being even the reincarnation and circles of rebirth. So for me to get down and nail down the specifics of it is just, I don't think, something that I want to do. So that's as much as I'll give you right there. It is something of an answer, so it's not a complete raffle. Okay, Emma, we'll do Emma and then over here.
Okay, yeah, I was talking about Lucerne. About her opinion, did you write the last book in a way so that both opinions of Lucerne could still be real, or?
Did I intentionally write the last book so that both opinions could still be real? Yes, I did. I can answer that one straight out. The instructions I was left, my personal beliefs on the Wheel of Time, having read it for so long, my knowledge of what Jim said, all came together and said, look, we can't close this. We can have Rand think what Rand thinks. And we can have Semiraj think what Semiraj thought. But one of the great things about the Wheel of Time is the unreliable narrator. Every viewpoint is wildly unreliable. Even the most reliable of them are wrong about things sometimes. And Jim reinforces this numerously. And so I did write it specifically in a way where you can have both arguments, and both arguments are good. I know what I think, but I'm not going to tell you what I think because even that might be stepping too far. All right, back here.
To get to the gentleman who had a question about reincarnation,
Mm-hmm.
they actually answer that with Brigitte when she's in the world of dreams trying to help the girls, and she gets hurt and gets pulled out into our reality from the world of dreams. She's like, no, this can't happen. You don't understand. She's like, I've been ripped from the pattern. I'm supposed to die and reborn. and they kind of question her about it. And she says, look, she says, I'm reborn. She says that all the great heroes are reborn, but we don't remember it at that time of our life. But you can go back and read the stories, and she names off 6 or 7 examples.
Right. I think it's pretty well established in world that it happens, and I think you can use the Heroes of the Horn. You can also use any dreamers or wolf brothers. Can go into Tell, and they can meet with the heroes or with the wolves, who will explain some of these things. It can give you actual factual evidence. I mean, the wolves can explain this is what happens. No one has to have remembered their past lives specifically to have this told to them in a way that's pretty trustworthy. So anyway, other questions? And they don't all have to be esoteric questions like this. They can be, but they don't have to be. So if you want to ask something else, you're welcome to. Okay, Matt. Is this off of online or is this you?
No, this is me.
I'm not going to tell you. Oh, never mind.
I'll ask later. This is about Way of Kings.
Way of Kings, okay.
You mentioned the series is going to be 10 books.
I did mention that.
And I know that you're the first one coming out now.
Mm-hmm.
How do you perceive that it's going to be from a release?
Okay, release date standards. On The Way of Kings is my next series. If you don't know the background of The Way of Kings, when I first got published, it was 2003. You may have read some of that story, how I decided to go with Tor primarily because it was the Wheel of Time publisher and all these sorts of things, and didn't let my poor agent go and argue. He still feels bad about that, by the way. His job is to go argue and to say, Brandon's going to walk away, and I never let him do that. I'm never a credible walk threat. I mean, I go to dinner with Tom Doherty and be like, yeah, I'm going to be at Tor forever. I don't ever want to leave. I love you guys. And then my agent's like, Brandon. But, yeah, I mean, where am I going to go? Anyway, my first book that I sold was Elantris, standalone epic fantasy, and Tor wanted to sign a 2-book deal with me. Tor is like this. One of the reasons I like the company is they focus a lot on building an author rather than having a blockbuster book, if that makes any sense to you. There's a big distinction there. If you sell to some companies, particularly the bigger corporate companies, it's you get this one book and they promote it, and if it doesn't take off, then you're done. Tor does not have that philosophy. Tor says we're going to buy 2 or 3 books from a new author and we're going to promote them across a period of time and try and pick up a strong audience for the author, which gives you a lot more as a writer. There's a lot more freedom there. There's a lot more freedom to actually try to do something new and innovative because you can take some chances and have time to build an audience rather than sink or swim on your first book. So Tor comes to me and says, we want to buy another book from you. Do you want to do a sequel to Elantris? And I said, actually, I don't. Not now. I might someday. But I would really rather release a first book that's a standalone. Main reason for that being, I, as a fantasy reader, know I can only juggle so many big series at once. And having been juggling the big series that I was waiting for the endings for, I always got a little bit annoyed when I saw a new book by an author I hadn't heard of that said first of 7 or something on it like that. Because how do I know that that author can do it, right? I want to have a book where I can try them out and decide if if they're worth me reading, staying with them for the 7 or 10 years it'll take them to finish their series. I want to know if they can bring, each book to a satisfactory climax. I want to know if they can tell a good ending so that I don't wait for 10 years for an ending that stinks. These sorts of things. So I explained this to Matter and said, I want to have a standalone book that people know they can pick up and read and say, okay, I now know what Brandon kind of does. I know a little bit of what kind of writer he is. Hopefully each project is new and different, but yeah. And I said, but I do want to do a series. In fact, you don't grow up reading Robert Jordan without having in the back of your mind a grand epic. It just doesn't happen, right? Any of you who are writers here, I would suspect you as well have your grand epics that you wanted to tell. And I said, well, I've got this book I've been working on for a long time that I really think is awesome, so why don't we do the contract for that as well? So Elantris and a book called The Way of Kings. And he said, okay, send it to me. And I sent it to him. And then he read it and called me back horrified. Because the book was 400,000 words long, which if you have any, that's the size of Lord of Chaos. around the size of Lord of Chaos, and had something like 16 viewpoint characters, 30 magic systems, was the first of a 10-book epic, and was really, 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 really ambitious. And he was just scared, because he's like, I don't know if I can convince Tor to publish this. The length is going to be a real problem. Now, we as epic fantasy readers, we like long books, right? You guys like, I like long books. A long book does not necessarily mean a good book, but a long book that is good gives me that much more to love than a short book that is good, if that makes sense. That's why I love The Wheel of Time, because each one was thick and meaty, and they were good. And so, we like those, but bookstores don't particularly like long books. If you'll go and you'll look, for instance, at, and you'll compare The Wheel of Time, the new one, to another epic fantasy by, another author. Wheel of Time will cost $30 and will be 300,000 words. A 150,000 word fantasy epic will sell for $25. If you run that math as a bookstore, that means you can put two $25 books in the space of that $30 book. And so if you're looking at it simply from a marketing standpoint, the bookstores would rather the books be shorter. Because, if you go to paperback, it's even more stark, because the Wheel of Time books are like $1 more than the books that are half or even a third the length. And yet the Wheel of Time books take, double or triple the space on the shelf. And so convincing the bookstores to go along with a newer writer that is doing something that long was something that my editor was very scared of, and I was unwilling to split the book. The book did not have a break point in it. And so he was very hesitant. He didn't know if I was able to do a series yet, and in truth, that version of Way of Kings was, I'm getting to answer your question, by the way. I didn't see tons of hands jump up. That means I can talk if I want to. In truth, I wasn't ready for it yet. And I knew it, and when we talked about it, I said, I know that this book isn't quite ready. I haven't practiced enough yet to just do this. And in writing, I've mentioned this to authors, and any of those of you who are new authors. Sometimes it's better to try something a little less ambitious and succeed at it wonderfully, because the reader is not going to know. If you do, the reader's going to like a less ambitious book done in an excellent way more than they're going to like an ambitious book that fails. Now, most of the time they will like an ambitious book done excellently better than a non-ambitious one done excellently, but you can tell a really great story without having to have 30 magic systems and 4,500 years of history and all of these sorts of things that I was doing in this book. And I said, let me practice on a trilogy. I've got this great idea, and I outlined Mistborn for him. And I said, let me do a trilogy so I can practice juggling multiple viewpoints, so I can practice juggling across a series. Let's do this. And so that's why I did the Mistborn series. And after the Mistborn series, I decided to do another standalone because I want to make a habit of that. And this is part of the answer to your question. I like the standalone epic fantasy as a form. We don't see enough of them, I feel, in the genre. The reason we don't is because they don't sell as well. They simply don't. But I, as a reader, like the ability to once in a while grab a complete, self-contained novel in epic fantasy and know I'm going to get a great world and magic and all of these things and characters that is going to be its own book and then be done. And give me that great immersive experience, but not require me then to keep track of all of that for the next 5 years while someone finishes, a trilogy or something like that. But I can just read the book, get that wonderful experience, and then move on. And so I like writing them. And so that's where Warbreaker came from, was me doing that. And I was working on another book that was going to be the beginning of a shorter series again. I was going to do another trilogy or a duology. And that's when the Wheel of Time fell on me like a ton of bricks. Like a freight train, unexpectedly driving through the middle of my house and plowing into me. I told this story last year, so I won't tell it again. You all heard it, but Harry called me out of the blue unexpectedly, since I hadn't applied. In fact, I had consciously not applied to do the Wheel of Time book because I had thought it was not respectful of Robert Jordan. I thought I had withdrawn my horse from the race, so to speak, and then I won anyway, which is really weird. But anyway, that really changed everything. I had to drop everything. part of when I made the decision was saying, okay, my own projects all get put on the sideboard. I'm going to do the Wheel of Time now, and that's, you know, everything I have has to go to that. And so I finished Gathering Storm, and of course, Wheel of Time, anything related to Wheel of Time takes far more effort than you think it's going to. I will get to more questions here. And I finished, and we have the whole story on the split, which I explained last year and things. You can read my essay on it online. In conjunction with that was Tom Doherty, who's the owner of Tor, calling me and saying, Brandon, we don't have a Brandon Sanderson book for 2010. And I said, Tom, you just asked me to finish The Wheel of Time. Now you're wanting another book from me. Something here is not jiving. Of course, there's no book for me in 2010. It's because I dropped all of those books to work on The Wheel of Time. And he said, well, I really would like to have one. You know, your own readers deserve, is there anything that you have that we could do, that we could release? And I said, well, if you really want to, I said, I've got a project, but it's really ambitious. And Tom said something that he probably never should have said to me, which is, I don't care what it is. You know, he was, at that point, he had just read Gathering Storm, he was really pleased with it. He said, I don't care what it is, you do whatever you want, and we will publish it. This isn't the sort of thing you hear very often as an artist. Do whatever you want, we don't care. And so, if you read my blogs, I took the summer off last year after having spent 18 months or so straight on Gathering Storm. I was worried I was getting burned out, and so I needed to do something else. This fell in its time, and so I rewrote Way of Kings from scratch. Threw everything away and started over. I did keep my world book that I had spent 10 years designing. So that's a lot of work that I had, and I'd already written the book once. And so I told Tom, if it turns out good, if it turns out well, then I'll do this. So what is The Way of Kings? It's 400,000 words. It got up to 430, but I cut it down.
We noticed.
Yeah. Yeah, Facebook posts, if you follow that thing. It is something I've been working on now for 10, 15 years. My big grand epic that I've been wanting to tell. It has colored end pages, which he swore he'd never do again after The Wheel of Time because they're so expensive to put those maps on. I got those, my own colored end pages, because he said anything. I got Michael Whalen to do the cover because he said whatever you want. And he had to call Michael Whalen on the phone personally to get him to do the cover, because Michael Whalen doesn't do covers very often anymore. So Tom had to call him and call in a favor from '97, where Whalen had once said, if you really want me to do a cover, you have to call me and I'll do it. And so Tom did that, so we got Mike Whalen to do the cover. If you haven't seen the cover, it's gorgeous. I'd always wanted a Michael Whalen cover. That's another thing, if you can read, there's a Tor.com essay I wrote that's very from the heart about how Michael Whalen's work, it's in their program books, how Michael Whalen's work kind of inspired me a lot during the early years. So I got that, and there are 20 pages of illustrations inside the book. I read epic fantasy, I like maps. One thing I liked about The Wheel of Time, we get lots of maps. So I think we have 8 maps in The Way of Kings. 8 maps. One of the characters is a natural historian, so doing sketches and writing about animals and creatures. It's a pretty wacky world. And so I have actual illustrations where she has drawn the creatures in her sketchbook and annotated them, and those pages are actually in the book. There are places where they mention a beautiful relief done on one of the walls, and I actually have a rubbing from the relief in the book. So the illustrations aren't illustrating the book, they are pieces of art in the book mentioned. So I can kind of dip one toe into this whole multi-genre thing, so we can have some. Anyway, this is the sort of thing I love about epic fantasy. It's one of the things I love about Jim's books, and that we had with Tolkien even was the essays about it and stuff, that it feels real. He made it real for us, and I want this to be real, and so throwing in the art. And so every time I do one of these things, I can just see Tom rolling his eyes going, what did I do? But one of the other things, and this is the final answer to your question, one of the other things I said to Tom is I would do the first Stormlight Archive book. The series is called the Stormlight Archive. Weird name because I like weird names. I will do the first Stormlight book, but we will have to tell people straight up that the second one will not come out the next year. I will write the first one to be pretty self-contained, so it can be a great book on its own, but there's no way I can do this again, meaning get out Stormlight book and a Wheel of Time book in a very short time frame. And so after Towers of Midnight, there will not be Stormlight 2, though he wanted it. I said, I can't write them that fast. And so after that will be A Memory of Light, and then we will have Stormlight 2. So I was only able to do this one because I'd already written it once. So I could write it realistically in 6 months or so. Epic fantasies normally take me much longer than 6 months. The Gathering Storm took 16. And Towers of Midnight is shaping up to take just about as long, which is funny because it's getting published. They wanted only 11 months after the other one. So fortunately, this is a little tangent. Fortunately, in the past, one of the reasons why I think I was considered for Wheel of Time, one of the many reasons, one of the lesser ones, was I was very far ahead on everything. Right? Warbreaker I wrote in 2006 and turned it in 3 years before its publication date. I like to work ahead because it gave me flexibility. Well, you can see 3 years of time with me eating up a lot of that with Gathering Storm, and now and some of it with The Way of Kings. My buffer is all gone. I turned in Warbreaker 3 years ahead. I turned in The Way of Kings last week. And it's getting published in August. So I think it was 4 months before publication. So we've gone from 3 years to 4 months, and I think that the Towers of Midnight, I'm probably not going to be able to turn in until like September. They said October on it. They had been telling me November. It might be November, just so you know, despite what they're saying. In fact, I think there's really no chance it's going to be in October. But they didn't tell me about that. They just scheduled. I'm like, guys, that month means a lot. Towers of Midnight, there'll be a question about it inevitably. It is going very well. There are some things I had to work through. We can't rush it. When you're writing, as a writer, sometimes some things take a long time and sometimes some things go very quickly. And one of the things about writing is the readers can't generally tell between the things that came quickly and the things that came slowly. That's how art works. You don't notice what parts were easy and what parts were hard because the parts were hard we keep doing until they look like they were easy. And that's just the way it happens with art. And so, anyway, I'm still working on it. There's still some scenes I want to write. First draft of most of it is finished. But yeah, I can't really give you an ETA. I'm shooting for November. If I miss November, it's not going to be missing it by much. But if I do miss November, they would not probably release it in December or January, which are really bad months for books because people are so busy with the holidays and things. So if I miss November, it probably would be February. That would just be my guess. That's not on the record, That's even though you're recording this and posting it online. You can just post that. It's not on the record, meaning I don't have decision-making power over this, and things like this. It will be done when it's done, and I won't rush it. But just so you know, if I miss it by a week or two, that might translate to you getting it a few months later, just because those are terrible months to release books. Wheel of Time is a special case. It can kind of break some rules, and so they may just release it in December. I don't know. I really don't know. It's coming. It won't be years, but yeah, the book's got to be good. So I think you would rather me take a little extra time to make sure of that, so that we don't end up with me calling Bashir the wrong thing. Again, no, that's going to happen. That's really going to happen. Hey, thank you, Laura. That's going to happen. Partially, it's the way that I work. Partially, and this is kind of a fun thing. I'll save this one in case there aren't any questions. Just a fun thing about me. But you had a question, so let's go ahead and do that.
Do you ever second guess your decision to finish the series?
Do I ever second guess my decision to finish the series? Yes and no. I mean, there are little voices. Anytime you're doing something really hard, like, I've never run a marathon, but I assume some of you people who are more into,
Did you just say you hear other voices?
I hear lots of voices. I do. That's one of the signs of being a writer. Thank you very much. I've never seriously regretted it. The only time I seriously regretted it was the night after I said yes. How many of you heard this story at one of my signings? Okay, a good number of you. I'll give you the very short version then. It was that night after I just said yes, what did I just do? No one can write this book but Robert Jordan, so I'm going to fail. That was the really, the big second guessing. Until I came to the decision that as a fan, I would rather do it myself than let someone else screw it up, because I feel someone else would have screwed it up more than me. Though I really do believe that no one can write this book like Robert Jordan could. In fact, I mean, to be perfectly honest with you guys, I think what I'm writing is a patch. I'm a religious guy. I believe in the afterlife. I believe that someday you are all going to be able to read Robert Jordan's version of these books. And my books are just to get you there, to tide you over until you can get the real ones. And I hope to do a really good job, so it's not an excruciating wait, that you can get that closure and get those books you want. But someday, mine are going to get replaced with the authorized versions. And I'm perfectly all right with that, because I want to read them too. Partially realizing that was something that helped me. Partially realizing I didn't want anyone else to screw this up. And occasionally, like when I'm in the middle of just something really hard, I'm like, why did I decide to do this? Why did I become an author? I should have been a computer programmer, like something normal, like my brother. But that doesn't happen very often, because I really do just love doing this. And if I stop for 5 minutes, after 5 minutes, I'm like, oh, I gotta get back to my writing. Though I did give up Halo 3 and Final Fantasy 13 to write these books, so I told people that I don't get to play Halo 3 until I finish the Wheel of Time. That's what I told myself. And then the Wheel of Time stretched out, and I'm like, you guys have to play Final Fantasy 13 for me, because I can't play it for a few years. I love those games. I'm not missing a whole lot. I've heard that. I've heard the 13th one doesn't have to have a lot of mini games and things, which is kind of sad. But anyway, all right, question over here.
Quick two-parter. Who did the sketches in Way of Kings, the internal stuff?
Okay, first question is, who did the sketches in Way of Kings? I actually hired 6 different artists based on their styles and their line art. Isaac is doing all the maps. He did the maps for the Mistborn books. One of the things I approached him with and said is, I want the maps to be maps for in-world, which means that I want each of them different maps to have a different feel, as if they were drawn by a different artist. And so one is, a painting done by this painter who visited this area once and then painted this grand version of it that's actually not that accurate, and then wrote, named a few things after himself. That's kind of funny. Isaac did that. And other maps are detailed surveys by the Royal Surveyors. Other maps, one of them is actually a map scratched into the back of a shell that some soldier just carried around to get his way through the camp. That isn't, that's just, things like that. And so that's where, I had a different artist, Ink Thinker, who's worked with me on some stuff. If you've seen some of his Mistborn fan art, I really like. He's good with line art. He's doing the sketchbook pages. There are 6 of those. And then there are 4 other artists doing 1 page each that are art from the world, where I wanted somebody who could do an illuminated manuscript or these different sorts of things. So.
Second part was, is there any part of Way of Kings that kind of lends itself to merchandising, like the medals that are necklaces and the... Right,
as there merchandising, I don't think, is there anything in the Way of Kings that lends itself to merchandising? I don't think of this when I'm writing the book. It's just not appropriate. But there are 6-foot-long magical swords that can cut through anything. So, one of the things about Way of Kings is that for a while I've been wanting to write a book that dealt with magical technology, the advent of magical technology. I've always, part of me as a fanboy is wish that we got a book during the Age of Legends, and we never did. And part of me is fascinated by that concept of magic replacing technology or working as a hybrid. And so Way of Kings is taking place in a world where we're right on the advent of that. things are just starting to appear. They're having devices that, will cool a room or heat a room instead of, and they're magical. They're gemstones infused with this stuff. And so we're right at the advent of that. So the jewelry with gemstones could work. But one of the extrapolations that came from that as well, what would I do if I had access to stuff like this? I would make magical plate mail power armor. And so we have suits of armor, which are knights in plate mail, big, cool things that actually are magical powered, so you can punch through walls and jump off buildings and stuff. And so I don't know if we want to sell suits of plate mail, but that could be cool. But the gemstone thing could work very well. Yeah. So that's what's going on there, right here.
I've heard mention of a sequel to Warbreaker. Is that still in the works?
Sequel to Warbreaker, is it in the works? When I signed the Warbreaker contract, it was actually an interesting contract because what I signed for was 2 sets of 2 in separate worlds. I was going to alternate. So it was going to be Warbreaker and then something in my Dragonsteel world, which is one of my other long-time developed worlds. There was kind of a standalone, then a half sequel to Warbreaker, and then a half sequel to the Dragonsteel book. The book was called Liar Apart Now. I posted some chapters on my website. The Wheel of Time came at me when I was halfway done with Liar Apart Now. And it wasn't going very well, so I was happy to put it aside. Warbreaker turned out pretty well. I liked Warbreaker. I do have a half sequel planned, which means that some of the characters will go on, but it is not a continuing story, if that makes sense. Standalone book, but another sequel in the world with some of the same characters. Because I haven't cut off in the middle of a story, I don't feel like I have any urgency necessarily that I have to finish that. And so I will someday do it. The book is called Nightblood. Until it gets changed, named after the sentient talking sword who likes to kill people. I will someday write that, and this kind of ties back to what is the release schedule. I actually didn't completely answer that. Way of Kings is 10 books. Stormlight Archive is 10 books. Tom asked me not to tell people that, so you pretend I didn't tell you that, because he thinks that it'll scare people off by being so big. You're Wheel of Time fans. If you got scared off by big books and long books, then you wouldn't be here. I do have all 10 books plotted out. I do this with my books. It's just something I like to do. I like to know, so I know what's happening in each of the books. I promise one every other year. Sometimes they may be faster, but the thing about the Stormlight Archive is I like to do new things, and I think people like to occasionally get new things. So what I kind of told Tom for my schedule that I was planning was first one, then a 2-year gap, and then 2 in a row, and then a year gap, not a 2-year gap, but a 1-year gap, and then a year gap where I release a standalone, so either the Warbreaker sequel or Elantris or another standalone I've been working on for a while, and then 2 more, and then something like that. So 2 in 1, 2 in 1 is what I'm planning right now.
Do you feel like you're being prepared for that whole moment when you have fans 20 years from now that are like, when is he going to release that?
Yeah,
you're meeting a lot of people that
being involved in Wheel of Time fandom has prepared me for a lot of things. We should really be making Jason do that because he's my handler.
Really should. Where is it?
Yeah, back in the back, goofing off. He really does look slick in that suit, though, doesn't he? We pick on Jason, but we really appreciate Jason. We should mention that. He's fun to pick on, but he's a long time been the heart of Wheel of Time fandom, and even people like me who weren't deeply involved in it were touched by Jason's work in the community years before I was involved in this. So we really appreciate you, Jason.
Do I need to get you water now, though?
I've been prepared. One of the things I told Tom is that writing on the Wheel of Time changed me as a writer so dramatically, made me learn so many things, that is what actually made me able to write The Way of Kings. I don't think I would have ever been able to write that book, well, at least not in the near future, if I hadn't been working on this, because it was so blasted hard to write The Gathering Storm. It's a hard book to write. It was really hard. It was challenging. It was, I should use the word challenging because when I say hard, you think that, I don't know what connotations that bring, but it was a really challenging book to write. It forced me to stretch and learn, and just being involved in that book was, I mean, Jim was a genius, and trying to step into those shoes even a little bit forced me to stretch in ways I didn't know I was capable of doing. So, all right, your hand's been up for quite a while, so let's go back to you.
Quick question. You talked about how standalone fantasies are often, or the fantasies are often thicker, 400,000 plus word count. With the advent and the oncoming technology of ebooks, do you see that making it easier for fantasy writers?
Yes, I do think. The question is, will ebooks make it easier? I think if we do, I don't know how quickly we'll change to ebooks. I was talking about this with Will earlier. I don't know that they'll make the change really fast as people think. Maybe someday we will switch over. I don't think it'll happen in our generation. But it does take the pressure off a little bit on word count wise, because the two reasons not to have long books are readers aren't going to really pay double for a book that's twice as long. It's just for some reason we don't in entertainment. Same thing with films. We don't pay double for a film that's twice as long. We pay the same amount. And yet the costs in producing a film twice as long, they aren't double, but they are significantly larger. And the same thing with a book. Producing a book twice as long takes me twice as long to write in most cases as someone who's writing shorter books, or when I write a shorter book. And the editing and the revising and things. I mean, my editor on Way of Kings, poor Moshe, has just had to kill himself to get this book revised. Fortunately, Harriet stepped in and offered to do a draft for us to take some of the pressure off him. So Harriet did actually edit Way of Kings for us as kind of a guest star to come in. And she's really good at what she does, so we were really happy. But the amount of time and all this stuff that goes into it, it is not decreased, and it's not. We don't get paid twice as much to write twice as long a book. I just do it because I love it. If I were doing it just the money-wise, I'd be writing books half as long. It will take off some of the pressure, but at the same time, that's not going to change the fact that writing a 400,000-word fantasy epic takes a long time to do, and so. But
I was just curious about.
But it'll take this bookstore pressure off. They won't care as much, and the publisher won't care nearly as much because they won't have to pay so much more to print it, which is one of the other big reasons. Losing both of those things will give us more freedom as authors, and you're going to already see some of that. If we look at the Lord of Chaos ebook, you look at the cover of that. If any of you've seen that, they were able to do something with the Lord of Chaos ebook cover that you could never do with the regular book cover. It's this large scene that you have to scroll through to see, the battle, and that's awesome. That's the sort of thing we can do with ebooks. It gives us some freedom. All right, you had your hand up for a while. Did you still have a question, or okay?
Okay, you talked a lot about standalone fantasy.
Yes.
What would you think about a book that has standalone short stories for its chapters? And the way it works is instead of having, say, 40 chapters at like 5 pages apiece, you have like 16 at 25 pages apiece.
What would I think of a book that had short stories for chapters instead of a lot of short chapters, a couple of longer chapters that together tell a story? I would think it would be called Foundation. I'm joking. Isaac Asimov did that in the Foundation series, which is a genius book, but it is a collection of short stories that tell one larger story. I think it would be great. I haven't seen anyone do it in fantasy, but I'm sure there are people who have. Most of the time when they're doing it, though, they're not approaching it as deliberately as you seem to be thinking of it, because with Asimov, he wrote these short stories and published them all in magazines, and then collected them into the novel. And you would be talking about actually writing a bunch of short stories. And I think there's a lot of different ways you can approach novels. One of the things, I thought about this a little bit with Way of Kings. With Way of Kings, with epic fantasy, you have one kind of, there's a big problem in epic fantasy. It's not quite a problem, it's just an issue to deal with, and that is, how do you help the reader keep track of a large cast of characters? And there are two general paradigms for doing this. One is the quick switching between chapters, between viewpoints. So it's like boom, 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 you're seeing a bunch of people. George R. R. Martin does it this way, if you've read any of his books. The early Wheel of Time books did it this way. I actually did it this way in Gathering Storm, more like some of the earlier Wheel of Time books. The other way is to have large swaths of time from one viewpoint and then leave them alone and really either not come back to them in the book, or if you do, come back to them many, many pages later. That's kind of like the middle wheel type books where you're reading along, you're like, oh, I'm just into Perrin's viewpoint, and then, oh, Ray, naive. Okay, how long until Perrin? There's no more Perrin? What? Stuff like that, right? This is an issue because the quick jumping, what it does is it has the danger of you then have to juggle everyone at once, and it can get hard if you've got a bunch of characters and you're juggling all of these characters, keeping track of all their plots is just hard. And with the large swaths, you can keep track of just one character for a period and remember what they're doing. But the problem with that is then you really get into that character and then it stops. And then you have to relaunch into a new book almost when a new character starts. And I thought a lot about this, and one of the things that the quick viewpoints can do is show you cool places around the world. Oh, 10 minutes, I talk too much. Cool places around the world. Anyway, one of the things I did with Way of Kings is I said, okay, I'm going to split the book into 5 parts. And each part, I'm going to tell a novelette style. I'm going to try and have a full arc for 2 characters. And then the next part, I'm going to switch to 2 new characters and do a full arc for them. And then the next part, and so that we have that sort of thing, so that you've kind of got these mini novelettes about these characters together, and so that if you go into it knowing the form, when you get to the end of the part, then I brought the character hopefully to some sort of climactic moment, and you can be okay leaving them for a while because it's not cliffhangering you as much, and then we can do the next part. I actually decided this book to have one character the same through all 4 parts, so he's got 4 arcs, and then we alternate 2 other characters, so 2 parts on one, 2 parts on another. But what that lost me was this quick jumping around that is really cool. And so in the late stages, my editor came to me and said, we really need more scope. And so I actually added 6 short stories to the novel, which are short 2,000-word stories from a character that is not appearing again in the book. That is, I call them interludes, so you actually know when you read that chapter, it is a short story set in the world that you can read about a place that has been referenced, and it has a piece to the puzzle and things, but it's a character that you can read about and then you can forget about, essentially. That you learn stuff, you see this part of the world, and then you can move on. And so it's actually a book built out of 1 full novel for 1 character, 4 novelettes about 2 characters, and then 6 short stories in the same book. So it's kind of weird. This is one of these things that when I did it, Tom's like, what, really? But okay, so anyway. We ought to do the questions. I saw some hands over here. I ought to go, yeah.
You did a lot on Warbreaker online
Yes.
before it actually came out as a book. I know there were some concerns of the book sales and how that would go. What was your experience with it?
What was my experience? I released Warbreaker for background. I actually released chapters as I wrote them in first draft form on my website. And then released the entire book for free once it was done, 3 years before it came out. And then released new drafts as we did them. What was my experience? I think my editor and my publisher and my agent were terrified. I wasn't so worried because I know fantasy readers. We like books. And if we want to have the book, we'll buy the book. And if we don't want to have the book, we'll find it some other way. And so I didn't really think it was going to lose me sales. I figured it would only give me publicity. Because the people are going to buy the book, fine. I don't have this sort of opinion that the music industry has that, for some reason when people are downloading our music and their music and trying it out, they look at that as stealing instead of publicity. I think it's publicity. And I think that people who like art will legitimately support the artist because they want to, and will go and say, okay, I like this book, I want to have a copy to loan around, or I just really want to say, make more books of this style, so I'll go buy it. And if you can't afford to buy it, then I would rather you be able to read the book at least, because I remember a time when I couldn't afford novels. I mean, I still bought them, I spent my paper out money on them, but I went to the libraries and checked out half the books I read because I was just reading too much, and I want it to be free. So I didn't have a problem with this. I don't know if they would let me do it again, just because it scared them so much. I've told them if I write the sequel to Warbreaker, I will do it the same way and release them online because the theme of the books. One of the sub-themes. I don't think it hurt me. We still hit the New York Times bestseller list. I mean, it hit 23 when Mistborn, the book before it hit 21, but it's a standalone. And standalones never sell as many copies. It sold slightly fewer copies than Mistborn 3. About what I expected it to do as a standalone, I think it only helped. There's no way to really know. If it had tanked completely, then maybe we could point a finger at this, but we can't really say either way. And one of the things is I did this before the Wheel of Time thing happened, and so I feel that Warbreaker being there, one thing you can't really measure is how many Wheel of Time fans said, "Who is this Brandon Sanderson Joker?" Went to my website and were able to download a book to at least read and say, "Oh, okay, this is different, but at least it's not crap." And you know how many people we relieved, we soothed by just them being able to do that. I don't think we can measure that. And so I was really glad that that book was there. That, you know, Warbreaker is not the book that I would immediately hand to a Wheel of Time fan and say, "Oh, if you like Wheel of Time, you'll like this book," because it's doing different things. It's much more focused on the humor in the world and stuff like that. I would probably hand the Mistborn because it kind of deals with some of the same concepts, but even it is not epic in the same way that Wheel of Time is. You know, if I find someone who really likes Wheel of Time, I might, you know, hand them Tad Williams or Steven Erikson. You know, I think that book was there that helped with that. I don't know. So there you go. And that's a non-answer to your question, but it's, yeah. All right, other questions?
Are there definitely only going to be 4 Alcatraz books? And if so, do you have plans for other middle grade?
Oh, wow, someone actually reads my Alcatraz books. Yay! If you're not familiar with Alcatraz, this is my loony middle grade series about a kid who discovers librarians secretly rule the world. It was written as an improv comedy book, written by myself to keep myself relaxed and loose between Mistborn novels, so that I could do something different, so I didn't get burned out. I do this a lot, and then it actually sold. There are 4 in the contract, and I've completed that contract. I've told my publisher and my agent that I cannot justify taking time away from the Wheel of Time to write a 5th one right now, because I just did the Stormlight Archive, and that got all my wiggles out for doing something different, if that makes sense. Beyond that, Scholastic has not gotten the books in the bookstores in the way that I wanted them to. They're really hard to find. If you haven't heard of them, there's a reason, because they're really hard to find. You essentially have to go into Barnes & Noble and say, or to an independent, like the wonderful Eagle Eye booksellers who are here right now. By the way, independent booksellers are awesome, so really just go look at their yeah, they really are. Spend some time, look at what they've got. We need to support our little bookstores, otherwise we'll lose them, and then we won't have people to give us advice on books and things. Anyway, I love little bookstores, so you have to go to a bookstore like that and ask them to order it in. Eagle Eye might have some here. They do? Oh, awesome. Well, if you haven't read these books and you're looking for something relaxing and fun, they're comedy fantasies about people who have really screwy magical powers that they use in cool ways. It's kind of like Mystery Men done as a fantasy novel, okay? People who have magical, yeah. That's kind of the best analogy, except for kids. I do have plotted another book in the Alcatraz series that will be the ending. I'm leaving you in the penultimate book. I'm sorry, but I guess it kind of fits for this series. By the way, the series is about making fun of the reader too, so. I will write that someday. I might bring it back to Tor, bring the books to Tor and do an omnibus of all 4 so people can actually find them in bookstores and then write the last one. There's that. DreamWorks Animation does hold the movie rights, and if the film gets made, that will change things drastically. But you know, that's Hollywood. We have Larry here nodding. How often do films actually get made that get optioned? I've read the screenplay. I like the screenplay. Katzenberg is on the record as saying, I think this would make a better live-action film than an animated film. So who knows what'll happen? The option expires in July. We'll know then if they decide to pick it up or not. But I do have other plans. In fact, if you come to my reading, I will probably read from a middle grader YA book, just because I have several of them on my computer sitting there unfinished. And there's a chance that I might decide to release one those next year, so that we have a solo Brandon Sanderson title for next year. In fact, I've approached her. There is one that I finished and completely wrote, but haven't had time to revise. And if I took a month off between Towers of Midnight and A Memory of Light, I could spend 1 month, revise this book, and have a book that I can at least release, because I know Stormlight 2 isn't going to be out. I might do that, so you may see something like that next year. So come to the reading and I'll talk about those different books. The one that I have finished is a steampunk. I wrote it. Yeah, I wrote it 4 years ago. Wow. I wrote it 4 years ago, or 3 years ago. 3 years ago. I wrote it 3 years ago because it was my diversion book that I wrote in 2007 before the Wheel of Time ran into me, as I say. And it's about a chalkboard magic where people draw with chalk and things happen. And the premise for it was this is what I do with books. I love these wizard school books. But no one ever tells the story of the cleaning lady's son, who is not a wizard, who just works there. And so this is the story of a muggle at Hogwarts. It's the story of a kid who can't do the magic, but he's this total fanboy for the magic system. He's the son of the cleaning lady who's able to go to the school because he gets by working there he can go. So he can take the classes except the magic ones. And it's his story when murders start happening at this steampunk magic school. So anyway. It's really wacky and fun. I have that one, and I have a dark dystopian superhero book that I'll probably read something from or something in my reading. Okay, we got time for one more question, and this hand has been way up back there. Oh, hi, I know you.
Yes, you were
Yeah.
Well, I would like to repeat the question. What would happen if Rand decided to balefire Leavenworth's bedroom?
Man, you guys are really into asking this question. What would happen if Rand decided to balefire Leavenworth Smedry? Leavenworth Smedry's superpower, he's in the Alcatraz books, his superpower is that he can arrive magically late to appointments. Yeah, I warned you. I think he would get lost on the way there and never show up to wherever Rand wanted to balefire him, because his talent would engage and he would end up getting there late. So right after Rand left, he'd show up and say, "Well, can I have an appointment here?" So Rand would not be able to balefire him because he would just never get there. Wherever Rand wanted to find him. So that's how the talents work in this magic powers work in this Smedry books. Okay, I will be around answering questions. In fact, I'll sit up here for a few more minutes. Thank you guys for coming. Come to the reading where I'll do some more of this. So, yeah. And by the way, nobody got rappoed. I think, was my introduction that scared you away from that or whatever? But no one got rappoed. I do have the cards, I have to give some of them to Maria. You can't get a raffle card for Asmodean questions. I've already given out too many for that.